I've got quite a few slides and I'm worried about time because I also want to have some participation. So is that okay if we get started like as soon as possible?
Yep, I think I don't have anything important to say. It's one thing that I think some of our participants may struggle to access to the share file and download the document because uh, I think some of them because I try to use the 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 online drive
Yep.
to get to the share file, and I find that it got error. The server got error. Uh,
Oh,
and then I go back to the link that Moni provide to us, and then it will well. So if I click on the link, it will well. But if I check on my online drive, it didn't work. So it may happen to other participants. So for those who have this experience, uh, you can just go to the link that provided by Moni directly, and you can access and download everything that Moni uploaded. Yeah.
okay. Good to know. Thank you. I've also put that article up on a Padlet, which I'm going to share the link with you all a little in a little bit. So you'll be able to what I'm hoping to do is actually do some group work today so you can have a look at that PDF that I circulated, the particular article. So just to say the slides will be available in the share drive. In fact, they already are. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a Padlet link there as well, where there's some questions and there's a little homework task for you to do before the class next week. I don't know that DB will talk about that, but I'll respond and put some feedback to whoever does the homework task as well. It's quite simple. It won't take you very long if you want to do it. All right. Well, thanks, Kim-san. Great to be with you all again. And why don't I just get straight into it? Is that okay with everyone? And what I'm going to do is just share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for just confirming that. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is the very basic building blocks of what research is, and then talk about research problems, research puzzles, and what is probably the most important thing is how to formulate and identify a research question. So let me just start by explaining in a little bit more detail what we're trying to address in this 2-hour session today. Firstly, we're going to be asking what is research and why should we do it? We're going to talk, actually, I'm not going to talk about too much about the relationship between research and theory. That was for another presentation. I should have deleted that point. But I'm going to talk about the stages of research. I'm going to talk about problems and puzzles. And we're going to talk, most importantly, about research questions and how to think about identifying a research question. When you get the question right in research, you are on a safe pathway. But it's not as easy, I think, as we might imagine to get our research questions right. And when I say right, I mean productive and scaled at the right level. So we're not trying to take on too much or we're not trying to take on too little. So I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about that today. So let's start first of all by sort of thinking about what it is that we're doing when we're conducting research. We're trying to find answers to questions. So the research question is important. We're trying to investigate things that we don't know about. Might be a particular phenomenon. We might be trying to find the answer to a question that's quite hard and quite persistent. We're advancing knowledge. So we're doing research not to replicate what we already know, hopefully, but to build on what we already know and to identify some new elements of what we already know. We're exploring phenomena that need further understanding. And hopefully, if we're tackling social problems, for example, I mean, this is a course about inclusive social research, we're trying to find solutions to problems that may or may not be recognized. So we might be exposing a problem that we think needs attention, or we might be wanting to do more than that. We might want to also try and propose some solutions to that problem too. Some of the elements of what research is it needs to be rigorous. So what that means is that we need to think about the methodology. How do we go about answering our research question to ensure that the methods that we use are understandable to others, that they're clear, and that if someone else was to do the same thing using our methods, they would get the same result, right? So we need to make sure it's robust. It's clear, our research is clear, and there is a systematic quality to it. We're not just cherry picking. So if I say cherry picking, what I mean there is we already develop a hypothesis and we go out into the community to find the evidence that supports our hypothesis. That's not necessarily going to be helpful. You know, it's not necessarily rigorous research. We want to make sure that we canvass a field of experience or a field of opinion. So we have all the information that is there in the community rather than only the information that suits and supports our hypothesis. It needs to be credible. So it's building on knowledge that already exists. We're engaging with the body of literature that is already there and seeking to add to that literature, contributing new and reliable information. And it's specific. So we're not trying to do too much. We're just trying to focus on the key problem that we're interested in investigating. And often what happens when we do research is we start with one thing, but we can easily go down a rabbit hole into a whole lot of other things. So it's quite important to keep our focus as contained as possible. Okay, how's everyone going? I might say one thing I'd like to say, please put your hand up or, use your emoji or call out to me. If there's something you don't understand, I'm more than happy for you to ask for clarification. So things that research allows us to do. This might give you some ideas for your research proposal. We can categorize. We can look at a field of data and try to make sense of a very diverse array of experiences by grouping them together to say these are sort of types of responses. Say we generate a survey and we want to understand community responses to a particular scenario. Research allows us to then develop a framework of analysis where we can group different sorts of responses together rather than treating every response as an individual response and then, trying to make sense of that. It allows us to describe observation or phenomena. So it allows us to tell a story about what we're finding in the field and to explain that. So to think about, not only what we observe, but then why we observe it, what are the causal explanations underneath that? We can evaluate different sorts of responses, or we can create evaluations of, even if we were to evaluate this course, right? We would create a survey. In fact, we've already started that process because of the pre-course survey that we issued to you a couple of weeks. No, when was that? Last week? So our evaluation process for this course is a form of that. It's a form of research. We will do a mid-course review, and then we'll do an end-of-course review, and we'll compare the results across the three surveys. So evaluation, I'm sure many of you probably do this kind of thing in your own work. We can compare, and that's quite an important sort of research in social science, comparing experiences across settings, comparing in politics, comparing experiences in different political communities or different political contexts or across states, for example. So comparison is important. We might also say, be interested in trying to work out correlation. You know, is one type of experience in one setting evident also in another setting? How do those things correlate? We might also, if we identify correlation, the next thing we might do is look at causation. How do we identify the causes of the correlations that we see? We might try and predict from our research. We might say, well, a particular event has happened in a particular set of conditions in the past. If those conditions look like they're building in the present, maybe that's predictive of a certain occurrence happening again. I'm being very vague here, but I think predictive research is quite a dangerous thing to engage in, but that doesn't mean that lots of people will do it. Maybe in certain fields it's easier. For example, if you think about the relationship between environmental factors and rise in certain types of illnesses and diseases and that kind of thing, that might make more sense. And sometimes research can be a means by establishing control over a particular situation. With more knowledge, we might be able to manage the outcomes of certain situations better. So, you know, sometimes research allows us to have better control over a set of circumstances or over a phenomenon. So let's now talk about stages of research. We can think about these. I mean, these are, how can I put this? Not every project will look like this, but there is, I guess, commonality that some of these stages will be evident in all projects. So first of all, we might think about the identification of an area of interest, a problem, or a puzzle. Now, I'm going to go into more of this in a minute. Then, okay, we might say, okay, this is something that I think needs further research. What do I do next? Do I go and try and develop my research question? I would say no. I think the next thing you need to do, and typically what I tell my research students is they need to go and consult the literature. What's already been written? What can we find in the scholarly literature? What can we find in the grey literature? Like if we're doing sort of research that maybe NGOs or government agencies have developed some of their own discussion papers or think tanks. So we want to understand what the academic literature is saying and maybe what the literature that's developed by practitioners as well is saying. And from there, then if we're thinking about the importance of building new knowledge, that's at the point where we say, okay, now what are my research objectives and what is my research question? So I think it's very important to think about consulting the literature to situate the development of your own research question. Because the danger is if you don't do that, you develop a research question that somebody, or there may be many people who have already developed a comprehensive answer to that question. So we're replicating work that's already been done. It's much better to build on work that's already been done. From there, we need to develop a methodology, which sounds like a scary word. And lots of people, you know, when you ask what's your methodology, they may really struggle. But really, all you need to think, the way in which to think about methodology is just to say, how can I do this research? What am I going to do? What are my steps to answering my research question? From there, we might go back to the literature review and see how other people have tried to answer this research question and why, and that helps us then justify why we think something else needs to be done, why further work needs to be done. So why those existing answers don't satisfy you as the researcher and you want to do a little bit more work on this. Then we might go back and work out our conceptual framework. So both how are we going to generate the data that we're going to use for this study, and also how are we going to analyze it? So methodology kind of has two different components. Important to think about that and also build on the way, again, learning from the literature review that you've conducted, to think about how others have tried to answer the question. So not only what their answer is, but how have they tried to do it, and take some lessons from that. Then we can get into the more practical and the fun side. I mean, it's all fun in my view, but that's because I really love research. But the really fun part is doing the data collection, whether that be interviews or generating surveys or doing fieldwork observation or whatever it is that you're interested in. That's always the part that, you really feel like you're making progress. So data collection, and then sitting down and having a look at what the data tells us. So using our research methods to analyze our data. And then the last stage, but in some ways the hardest stage, I guess, is to write it all up. That's when you need the discipline to be sitting at your desk to write up all the material that you've generated. Okay. Is everyone following okay? Give me a thumbs up if you're feeling like I'm making sense. Thank you. Good to see. Lovely. Good to see the thumbs up.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
Will you go for detail on each stage of this later
I'm
on?
not going. Yeah, the whole program will go in detail through all of this, if that's okay. So I'm only going to really focus today on the first part, which is identify an area of interest, problem, puzzle, and research question. Is that okay? So next week we're going to tackle literature review. We're going to talk about methodologies further down in coming weeks. So this is just a broad introduction and so you can understand how all the stages in the program fit together. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okie doke. And as I said last week, I mean, lots of people think research is really hard and you have to be super ambitious with the project that you do. I would argue that we all do research all the time, and I made that point last week. And so we don't have to be super ambitious and feel like we have to reinvent the wheel every time we do research. We can actually do research and progress important research by talking to people in our everyday communities. I was in a community that got flooded in Brisbane. We all lost our homes in 2011. And I did research on the experience of my community, just talking to women when I went to pick up my kids from school who'd been through the same experiences as me. And we would go and have a coffee and we would just chat about our experiences. And I would write a transcript up of that interview. And I ended up publishing that work. I made sure I had ethical clearance to do the work. And I made sure that the women I spoke to understood what I was doing. But it was a fairly low scale project, but I managed to generate 2 research publications out of it. And plus it was quite good therapy for me after going through the experience of losing my home after the floods in 2011. I mean, was it therapy? Sometimes it was kind of hard work too. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't have to sort of invent hugely ambitious research projects. You can actually conduct very credible, robust, and achievable research, investigating experiences in your own communities as well. So I just really wanted to reiterate that point, that we're doing that all the time in the way we move through the world. And to formalize that process and call it research, doesn't mean it has to, I'm using those examples just to make clear that you don't have to have a big, massive research agenda. You can create very credible research projects just working in your local community and talking about challenges that might be experienced by your community, members of your community too, if we're doing inclusive social research. Now, let's move on to this issue of research problems and research puzzles. So, if we're doing social research, often our work is focused on a desire to change something about the world, right? Or to understand a feature of our social environments. So I've got a few different examples there of what we could say is the first step in a research project, the development of a research project. And that might be thinking about or identifying or being motivated by a research problem, something that you observe in the community, in your environment, in your workplace, in your work, that you feel like needs more attention. So some of the examples I've got there, and I'm a gender scholar, so I'm going to use gender examples. It doesn't have to be gender examples, but I'm using these types of examples just as sort of ideas, examples of ideas that have motivated me in my work. And one of the big ones that has motivated me for almost 2 decades of research is the problem of gender violence and high rates of gender violence in my own country and in many countries around the world. Another one that is relevant to the example, the article that I circulated for you to have a look at this week is the difficulty of women getting into positions of decision making in parliaments. So as elected officials, parliamentarians. So why is it that around the world we have many established democracies, but why are women always in the minority in those democracies? So that's a problem, right? Well, some people might say it's not a problem, but for me, I think it is a problem if we're interested in the promotion of equitable and democratic decision-making processes. I think it's a problem. Another problem that we might think about, women are overrepresented. So by contrast, they're underrepresented in electoral politics. They are overrepresented in low-paying, labor-intensive industries like domestic labor or garment construction. And in fact, I have used examples from Cambodia about the garment construction industry in Cambodia. I don't know if that's still a big employer of women, but I use in my teaching a film from that was made a few years ago about the experiences of women garment workers in Cambodia. Yes, Ruthia, did you want to say something there? I see your hand up.
Yes. I have a question related to research problem here. The research how can we find that problem, and it just come up in our mind, or need some document that proves the problem, and we need to identify whether that problem already solved by the other scholar or not as well,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think first it can be an observation about the world. Absolutely. But then our next step is to say to ourselves, well, what's already been written about this problem? So because as I said earlier, we need to kind of go from our own opinion to then think about, well, what is the literature saying? So with your permission, if I keep going a little bit, is that okay? And I think I'll address this question in more detail in a minute. Is that all right? And if you still have questions, then please, by all means, let me know.
You.
Yeah. Someone just put in the chat too that garment manufacturing still quite what's the word? Still an important area of employment for women in Cambodia. Okay. So thanks for that. Another problem that we observe, that malaria kills thousands of people every year around the world. Okay, so another social problem. So our point, the next thing we need to think about is, okay, how do we go from observing a problem to thinking about framing it as a question, right? Now, I'm going to come back to the issue of puzzles and problems in a minute. But if we look at that problem of the mortality rate from malaria, that is a huge issue. Absolutely huge. Touches many countries around the world. So what we might do is think about a dimension of that problem. So not necessarily the problem in its entirety, but to think about how we could identify something that makes the problem more researchable and more easily manageable for us to develop a research project around. So we might say to ourselves, okay, malaria is a huge problem in a particular site, so we'd perhaps localize the focus of our research. But then we might say, okay, let's ask a question that's quite targeted. What makes some people more vulnerable to malaria than others? So then we might say, okay, could we identify some, the word has just gone out of my head. I can't think of the word, but I guess what I'm trying to, variables. Can we identify some variables that help us understand whether certain groups of people are more vulnerable to malaria than others? So that we might look at age as one variable. We might look at wealth, class as another variable. We might look at gender as another variable. We might look at location. Where are people living? Is it in particular types of rural environments that people become more vulnerable to malaria than others? So, and it would be, I think, fatal. It would not be terribly helpful if we looked at all of those variables together, because you would end up with too much data. But maybe looking at one of those variables as a site of investigation would be important. So say we tackle gender as a variable, that might tell us some things, but then we could say, well, what happens? Is there variables within the gender variable? Are younger women more vulnerable than older women? Are wealthier women more vulnerable than women who have a more marginal socioeconomic position in society? So we target in and zero in and make our research more specific. So that's just a little illustration of how we can go from a big problem that is an area of concern and then try and drill in to create a project that is more researchable and more feasible. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is research puzzles, because somebody's put here antimicrobial resistance also contributes to vulnerability to malaria. Well, that's a great point. That would be a really interesting study. And you could then ask, even, let's get more specific, who develops antimicrobial resistance? That would be a really interesting study, I think. You know, how does it compare across populations? Are wealthier people more likely to develop antimicrobial resistance because they access the drugs more frequently? Who knows? But I think this is a terrific answer, or a terrific insight. Thank you. Thank you, Mono. Okay, so I want to talk about puzzle-driven research now, because often we say that in actual fact, what we're trying to do with our research is show what is intriguing about the problem that we're interested in. What is intriguing about it? So to quote Mono's observation there, which is a really good one, why is it, the way of turning that question around, we might say, this issue of antimicrobial resistance, we might say, even though we have treatments for malaria now, medical treatments for malaria, why is it that populations are still vulnerable to malaria? And so then we not only sort of identifying microbial resistance as the key problem, but we're saying what's happened with the way these treatments are being distributed. How are they functioning in the bodies of people, but also in the community more generally? And then, why is it that this vulnerability to malaria persists? So we're going from what looks like a solution, but the solution hasn't worked. So that is the puzzle in relation to this challenge around malaria. So to draw back from that example a little bit, we can say that puzzle-driven research seeks to explain why a relationship exists between two variables. Why, despite X being observable, do we still observe Y? When X should make Y unlikely. So I've turned that into a bit of a mathematical formula. Just to help you think about what is the different components of the puzzle. So we have a situation where we feel like something should be a solution to a problem, but the solution's not working. It doesn't seem to mitigate the problem. So what is going on? We need to investigate that puzzle and identify what other factors are explaining why this relationship between X and Y, between the two variables, doesn't seem to work. So puzzle-driven research is focused on examining the unexpected or unanticipated conditions which don't really make sense, which should not occur, but do occur and are therefore puzzling. Is everyone following? We're going to do a practical exercise on this. If your head's spinning now, don't stress. We're going to do a group work exercise and a practical exercise to help. Bun's got thumbs up, Ryder's got thumbs up. Great. Great to see that you guys are following along. And so's Jakaira. Awesome stuff. And my apologies if I'm not saying your names correctly. I will learn them better over time, and particularly when we all meet up in person. All right. So again, how do we get a feel for what the puzzle is? This goes back to Rithia's question. We need to go back to the literature to develop a research puzzle that's persuasive and that actually feels like a really intriguing puzzle and justified. We need to go back to the literature. So we need to read the literature and understand what the literature is telling us about this particular scenario, this problem, and also about the proposed solutions. And some people might be arguing, actually, in the literature, we might say on the antimicrobial question, right? We might find some literature which says, oh, this isn't a problem, that actually the medicalized solutions to malaria are working really well. Or, so then we can say, well, actually, that's not the case. But then we might also find some really interesting literature about, the use of nets, treated mosquito nets, and that actually in the long term, they may be more helpful to the phenomena of reducing people's vulnerability to microbial resistance. Or we might find that, in the literature, there's also some explanations that say, well, we have microbial resistance because people don't use the antibiotics correctly, they don't finish the courses, etc., etc., etc. So we're trying to understand the terrain of research that's already been developed and where and how our puzzle sits within that terrain and why it's still puzzling. What element of the puzzle is still puzzling? So I'm just looking at the chat here. Does it always need to be an X and Y? How does it play out in exploratory type of research? This is a good question, but I would suggest that a lot of research, even exploratory research, is often beginning with that puzzle of, well, we expect a certain thing to be occurring, but it's not occurring, so we need to explore further, what are the other elements that might be occurring that will help us explain our puzzle. So I don't think we don't always have to have puzzle-driven research, and we don't always need that particular relationship between an X and Y. But I present this as a really productive way of helping you develop your research. So, it doesn't always have to be the case, but I would suggest it's quite a good and safe way to develop a research project that is researchable. So and the point that that is in the slide there perhaps answers this question too. Developing a puzzle-driven approach can help us strengthen the justification of research and why the research area is deserving of attention. If you can say, look, all these things, all these ideas try and answer this question, all these arguments or all this published research tries and finds solutions for this problem, but we still see the problem, then I feel like it needs more research, and your objectives, your research objectives become justifiable. So now I see Pav, you have a question. Is that correct?
Yeah, Nicole, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have a question regarding the research puzzle.
sure.
You said we need to do a literature review to find out the answer of the puzzle, and the remaining is, if the remaining is still puzzling, you need to find more answers. You need to conduct research. What if after your research, your result is the same as the previous literature? So is it worth publishing, or is it worth publicized to
could
the
be.
public?
It could be, Pav. Thanks. It's a great question. I mean, we also can do research to like we might say, for example, this question on malaria. I'm going to keep coming back to the malaria one because it seems to be, I'm on a theme now, so I'll keep going with it. You might find, for example, that studies have been conducted in a number of different countries around the world, but not your site, or there is something specific about your site that is interesting, or it has not been studied before. If your findings confirm the findings of another study, that's still good research, right? Because it's not necessarily that you're saying, you're still creating knowledge in the sense that you're showing, okay, these findings that were developed in another study, in another site, are actually replicated in my own study. So you're confirming the findings, and the originality is that work has never been done in your particular research site. Say if it's malaria, a particular rural community in Cambodia, or a particular socioeconomic situation, like a squatter settlement on the outskirts of a city, for example. Do you see what I mean? So you can still do research that confirms the way someone else has tried to resolve the research puzzle, but the innovative element might be that you've conducted this research in a community that has not been investigated or researched before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so your answer make me remember my teacher's instruction about the originality of research. Like,
Yeah.
you need to be like geographically specific to make your research
Yes.
regional, like let's say which provinces of Cambodia, or maybe specifically
right.
Cambodia.
Well, it doesn't have to be Cambodia, but yeah, in your case, yes. As long as there's something that you can say that it shows the ways in which you are contributing to knowledge, and that could be using a similar framework and maybe finding, and if you're confirming the findings of someone else in a way that shows that original research was a very robust project, right? But you're taking it to a new place. You're making that question and that problem travel to a new setting. And I think that's really interesting and exciting. Now, Rithya, you also have a question?
Yes. I just want to clarify about after reading review and explain why the explanation are not relevant or phenomena in that point. I just want to focus on the relevant here, relevant to what? Relevant to our study or our problem, or relevant to the methodologies or
Well,
yeah.
Rithya, this is the question that I think all researchers ask themselves is, how much do I need to read and on what, right? Because we do
Yeah.
need to read a little bit on everything. We need to think about, okay, say we're doing that. Let's go back to the malaria example. We need to understand what's been published on the social impacts of malaria, right? And let's just say we were looking at the ways in which different types of what am I trying to say here? Policy responses to managing malaria, social public health. Let's look at public health. We would need to read about public health responses to malaria and what they look like in Cambodia, as well as maybe a few other countries in Southeast Asia. We would need to look at ethnographic studies about how those public health campaigns are then understood by local people. We might then look at what else? And we'd need to read some methodology, right? How have existing studies been conducted and what methods have people used to get guidance from that? What else? That's at least 3 bodies of literature already that we'd need to look at. I imagine we might need to look at some comparative studies to think about, how are people identifying the different variables that shape experiences of public health campaigns on malaria in different parts of a country, whether it's rural, whether it's urban, whether it's coastal, and then we might also look at studies that look at the variable of wealth. So to answer your question is, you need to get a feel of what the existing debates, you need to probably set out and map out the various areas of research that you need to read. You can't read everything, but you need to read enough just to get a feel of the debates. Does that make sense? This is something that we'll talk more about next week. Kirill and I think, is it Kirill? I think Kirill's running the session on literature review. So we'll make sure that he kind of helps you think about which bits of the literature you need to read. Thank you. Mono, you've asked a question here. I seem to notify a new topic of research, usually end up doing typology, thematic analysis, categorization. How can we try to push ourselves beyond that? I think, yeah, I'm not really necessarily following the answer there. Are you saying that that's the way you've done research in the past and you want to try new approaches? Perhaps that's what you're saying. Hopefully what we show you in the next few weeks will help you to will help you develop ideas about new ways to do research. But I would argue, even if we're interested in innovative research methods, the puzzle-driven approach is often a good way to start. It's not the only way. So I'm not saying this is the only way to do research. I'm just sharing these ideas as one way that is productive and helps you ground your research and make it understandable and keeps everything sort of focused. So all the elements of the research are working together. Okay, with your permission, I might just keep going on. So, as I've already said, we're making distinctions to narrow down our general area of interest, our general interest in a problem, to a more specific researchable project. So we need to do reading and other forms of investigation to understand what the dimensions of the topic are. And to think about where and how our research can build new knowledge. And as we said, it may not be in the approach we develop. It may be that we actually just take this work to a new site where research hasn't been conducted before. And what's the interesting thing always, I would say, in research is if you can identify a discrepancy between what you thought you would see and what you actually see. because often we develop a project thinking we're going to find one thing and actually we find out a whole lot of other things as well. So sometimes my PhD students say to me, oh my gosh, I don't understand. These aren't the findings I expected. And I'm always excited when that happens, because that means you're actually doing really innovative research and you're challenging what's already been there. So if that happens, that's a good outcome for you. All right, now I think, yes. So what I want to do now is I want to break you up into groups if you have the energy for it, and to take a little look or to revisit, if you've already read it, this article on dynastic, the experience of dynastic female politicians and family rule in Thailand. So it's an article that seeks to that is guided by a puzzle, I would argue. Your job is actually to read the introduction. There is enough information in the introduction. So if you haven't read the article, read the introduction. It's only about 2 or 3 pages, and see if you can find the following things: the research problem, the research puzzle, the research question, any information about research method and how the data was analyzed and what the findings are. Now, you should be able to find that in the introduction. And what I'm going to do is, how many people have we got online here? I think we've got about, what have I got? 1, 2, 3.
We got 37
Yeah.
participants. Yeah.
37. Thanks, Moani. You're a legend. You're a legend. Okay, so 37, if I did 5 6s are 30, they're quite big groups. 6 6s are 36. How about, is groups of 6 too big, do you think? I think that could work, couldn't it?
Yep. 37, including you, me, and Kim San, and
Aha. So maybe I'll do, so
like
37,
5 or 6
30.
could be.
Yeah, I think I'll do 6 groups and we'll hold out. So I'm going to break you into groups. It's going to be, now how do I have to remember how to do that?
Under breakout rooms. Do you want me to do that, Nicole?
Oh, thank you, my friend. That would be awesome. I
Yeah.
can't see the breakout rooms thing, but if you can set up maybe 6 groups, Mwani, and just hold myself and maybe Kim Sun out, and we'll go around the groups. Now,
Yep.
there is a Padlet link in the chat. You can, as groups, maybe put some of your insights, record some of the answers to the questions in the Padlet. So if you click on that, you'll be able to access a sort of a online. It's like an online whiteboard, and you can just write your answers into the Padlet, and then we can come back and have a little bit of discussion. So I think we might do this for the next probably 10 to 15 minutes. Does that sound okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah? Okay, terrific. All right, Mwani,
So
if
we
you could.
got 6 breakout rooms in total, and 5 rooms are 6 people, and one last room is going to be only 5 participants. And yeah, it's ready to-
Terrific. So we'll let you know when the rooms are coming, when we're going to bring you back from the rooms. So if you can all join your rooms now, that'd be great. Do we still have a couple who haven't joined?
Nico, which room do you want me to join? or any link.
Yeah, look, Kim-san, I think we'll just give them a few minutes to get started. Is that okay?
Okay.
And then we'll go around?
Yeah.
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 But thanks. So Pav and Sophia, you need to join a room, please. Siniat?
Yeah, I got into
So, yeah.
the room 6, but I come back to find the question or the task. Sorry.
I will
It's
copy
on the Padlet. It's on the Padlet.
Yeah, I will also
Join-
copy the questions here. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank
It's
you.
on the Padlet, Siniat. If you go into the Padlet, you'll be able to find it.
Yeah, I cannot find the way to go back to the room 6.
Okay, yeah, let me help you. So, from the room 6.
Yeah, I was in room 6. I see the join breakout room. Oh, yeah, I can find
Yeah,
it now.
got it?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Finally. Great. That's good. All right. Kim-san, did you sent around that article earlier in the week, didn't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I just wondered.
But I think, I do. But like I mentioned, some of them I don't know how many may struggle to access to download it, from the share file, unless they click
Oh.
directly. Yeah, and I'm not sure how many of them have the time to read.
Yeah,
It
no,
is
I
quite
know.
it is quite interesting article. It's it take the time to read and comprehend it.
Yeah.
But it's a very good article.
It's
For
so interesting, isn't it? I read it again this
Yeah.
morning. I've read it a number of times, but I really like it. It's so interesting. I
very
mean, it's
interesting. Yeah.
but also like the methodology, I'd be interested to see what they think, because I find the methodology interesting in the sense that he just looked at what is it? Examining the assets declaration files, which is the way
Yeah.
he sort of traced the connections. So
Trace the
know.
connection, and also I don't think the author did the interview.
no.
No. Yeah. And
And
the
also,
problem,
it's quite interesting. There's this huge drop in the numbers of dynastic females, but he still says, "Oh no, this is a phenomenon." And I'm like, okay. So I'm interested to see what they make of all of that. I think it'll be, hopefully they can follow along if they've had the chance to read it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's why I said, I probably just should have said to them, just read the introduction.
yeah. And also, they don't have like a literature review section, right?
No, it's interesting,
You know what?
isn't it?
Let me give you a bit of context. When we study about the research proposal, when we have a research proposal training, so the format, the general format of research proposal, like you have research problem, objective, literature review, and so on. So for like inexperienced Cambodian researcher, they strictly follow this format that in the research paper, they must have a standalone literature review.
Yeah.
But and then sometimes I told them that no, you don't need to have a standalone literature review. You know,
Mm.
literature review can be integrated in the analysis, you know.
Mm.
So that's why I like your exercise, you know, to use this article as example and ask them to, you know, to identify literature review.
Yeah.
So because Cambodian academic and researcher cannot have access to journal database, so they cannot
Yes.
access to high quality publications.
This is the
So it's
problem,
very,
isn't it?
yeah, and it's very difficult for them to have a standalone literature review.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and they that usually they use NGO report or
Yeah.
you know
What they can
national
access
report.
easily.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever they can access and read, and they use them as literature review, which is wrong.
Yeah. Well, we have to think about that. You know, that's good feedback actually for next. I mean, are you doing the literature review module with Kirill next week? Is that you and Kirill? Or is it just Kirill next week?
Are you asking me or Moni?
Yeah, no, I'm asking you. I just because I know Kirill's doing the literature review, but maybe I'll raise that with him. You know, like where do you go to find literature if you can't access because there are open access journals. There are open access sites.
They are open, yeah. I can jump in to help fill in the
Okay.
gap, you know, to provide a bit of context
Yeah.
in
But it is
Cambodia.
important for
Yeah.
them to not just rely on NGO reports and policy reports. You know, that's research, but it's a different kind of research. You know, it has its place, but we also need that secondary
But it's-
source.
Yeah. And when they feel that they have to have a standalone literature review sections and they cannot do it, they got stuck and they got
They
stressed
get
out.
stuck.
And, yeah, they get really stuck. Yeah.
Okay.
And because
Hi, everyone. We just wait until everyone else comes back, which will be in the next minute or so. Okay, looks like we've got everyone back with us. Fantastic. All right. So let me get out of there. So how did you go with that? What I would love to do is just hear maybe some thoughts from, some groups have gone right the way through the Padlet. Group 3 has done some amazing work. Very good. But let's just go, I'm going to pick each group at random and hear something from them. So what research problem did the article address? Could we hear from someone from maybe Group 6? What did you put into the Padlet there?
Our answer, the research problem is about the dynastic democracy and its relationship with women's role in political engagements.
Okay, interesting. I would say you're there. I would say that maybe the problem is slightly even broader than that. Certainly the problem is dynastic, that's one of the problems that the research is investigating, but perhaps even a broader problem. I can see Group 2 has put gender inequality in politics in Thailand. They've also said dynastic female politicians, but I think the broader problem that is being investigated sort of more generally, if we situated this article in a broader set of debates, would be what Group 2 has put, which is this idea of gender inequality in politics in Thailand and the electoral system. So well done on that. But I think everyone sort of got, from what I can see on the Padlet, very good responses, which are picking up on the problem. Okay, what is the puzzle? This is the most interesting part for me of this exercise. What did you identify as the puzzle? So I just asked, who did I just ask to speak? Was it Group 5? I should have written that down.
Group 6. Yeah, you
Sorry,
asked
group 6
already. Yeah.
Okay, I've asked group 6 already. Let me ask maybe group 4. What did you identify as the puzzle? Group 4? From group 4 to answer? No one. Okay, well, I'll read out what someone has said from group 4. Although the non-dynastic MPs tend to be increasing, having political background is still significantly contributing to women MPs being elected. Okay, that's a good statement of a puzzle. That even though there seems to be a new political trend, these dynastic families still have a lot of political influence. Can I hear maybe from what did group 1 have as the puzzle? Could someone from group 1 jump in?
Hi.
Hi.
So yes, sorry. So for our group, we have identified that for the research puzzle, we are looking into the fact that political family tend to transfer their power with their family members, and when non-political family members also gain power in the parliament and in politics in general, they also tend to adopt the same practices that the older political family do. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Well, that's what the researcher is arguing, that there's this tradition, a dynastic tradition. So that I would say that is a fascinating puzzle. Whether it's the central puzzle of the research, I'm not sure, but it is a fascinating identification of a puzzle that you could then go on and do more research on. So that's a really intriguing identification of a puzzle in the research. I don't think it's the central one, but it's a really interesting one. So great work, great work. What I wrote was, the more democracy has taken root in Thailand, the less pluralistic it's become. Now, that didn't appear in the introduction, but it appeared later in the article on page 337. And so I thought that was a really intriguing puzzle that you could say drives this research, right? That democracy becomes consolidated in Thailand over time. And he talks about the parliament expanding in terms of the number of seats, so that there's a strong sort of tradition of representative politics, but at the same time, there's a strong dynastic tendency that's also evident, and that shapes how women access politics. So maybe in a piece of research that we read, we don't see one puzzle, we see a few different puzzles, which is also interesting, right? And they could be then puzzles that you go on and do further work on yourself. So I just want to spend one more minute on this because it will lead nicely into the next part of our class today. And that is to ask you about what research questions you were able to identify driving the research. So let me go to group 3, because group 3 has done a very intriguing thing here and identified 4 different research questions. So could we hear from someone from group 3, please?
Okay, I hope that I got the authority and the honor and the honor from my group members to read out the question that we collectively think of.
Just assume the authority because you have taken control and I love that. So continue.
Okay, so we have 4 questions here. So the first one is, I think the research question would be how many women in proportion in the MPs from 2019 to 2023 show connection and related and relation to political family tie.
Family, yeah.
And the second question, we also want to see like how many women and proportion in MPs in the same year show having no connection at all, because we want to see that the proportion who got a connection and who doesn't have the connection. And what are the dynastic connection of women MP elected in 2019, in 2023? So
23.
not only number, but also like what type of connection they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it marriage? Is it bloodline? You know, things like that. And
Yeah.
the fourth question is, how do women MP get into their position as MP? So is it their own inspiration? Is it wealth? Is it because they already have someone placing the trail for them, you know, things like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. They are very specific and targeted questions. So you can see that the article is actually answering all those 4 questions. But yeah, so that's great. You've done good work there. I would even say they're almost like methodological questions. But the question we could ask ourselves is there a broader question that sort of is the umbrella for all those very specific questions? Now we're running out of time. Sorry, yes, go on.
Yeah, I think the broader question would be to what would be the pattern of we want to see the pattern, especially there's a
Exactly.
specific duration year. So we want to see the pattern of women MP got elected within 2019 and 2023. So we want to see the pattern of those got elected.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think this is the broader one. And a number of people have put this in there well, they may not use the word pattern. Group 6 has used the word pattern. Does the pattern of the majority of women MPs elected sort of continue across time? This pattern of women from dynastic families, right? I can see group 6 asking this, identifying this question. Group 4 identifies it in a different way. What kind of Thai women have been elected to parliament? That's what I wrote as when I tried to identify the question. What kind of Thai women have been elected to parliament? So I think that's the broader question. In answer to the problem being, is there an underrepresentation of women? And then the question is, what kind of women are getting into the parliament? And the puzzle is, why is this dynastic trend continuing as democratization consolidates in Thai politics? Now, there's other elements that you've all identified that are really interesting as well. And with Group 1, we had a really interesting discussion because, as well as sort of answering that central question of what kind of women, there's also then a question about what kind of democracy is evident too. And so in the second part of the article, the researcher goes on to speculate. He doesn't necessarily answer this question, but he speculates that the kind of democracy that you see in Thailand is impacted and affected by the kinds of people who are being elected into the parliament. And he's particularly therefore thinking about what women do as parliamentarians. But that's in the latter half of the article. So it may not have, if you only read the introduction, it wouldn't emerge so clearly. So this research is doing a number of different things. There's so much more that I want to discuss about the methodology. You've all put some, or not all, but the people who got that far have put some interesting thoughts about the use of quantitative research and qualitative. It's interesting that to answer this question, there was no interviews done. The researcher just looked at the declarations on assets and that are lodged. It's a public document that all parliamentarians have to lodge, and sort of gleaned the connection, identified the connection to dynastic families through that. So, how reliable that is or what it tells us some things. I would argue it doesn't tell us everything, and that, having interviews would be a really interesting secondary source of data to do an important process, which we often describe as triangulation of our data, right? We might use a number of different sources. So there's statistical work that's being done in this article. There's some interpretive work from these asset statements. but I think maybe some triangulation with interview data would have been really interesting as well. Anyway, I want to leave this aside now. Great to see you all using the Padlets. Is there any questions that anyone has before I move on? Because we've only got half an hour left. Everyone?
Yeah, hello, Nico.
Hi, Pav.
Yeah, I just want to ask question regarding the type of research methodology. You said it's only quantitative, but I noted they listed down the case studies of maybe 7
Particular.
dynastic families, like how
Yes,
they
yes,
assume the role of
yes.
MPs throughout their family background. So
Yeah.
can we say is it qualitative in this
Yes, absolutely.
case?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes, you're absolutely right. I forgot about that case study element there. So they do go through each family as well. So that's a good observation. Thank you, Pav. So it's quantitative and there is also qualitative. And that, I mean, he doesn't talk much about how he's developed that qualitative data in the case studies. Would be interesting to know a bit more. It seems to me that that must have come out of the longer term existing study that is done. But thank you, that's a good point. So you're right, there is some triangulation there in terms of that other qualitative element as well as the quantitative, just the numerical and statistical work that is being done. Well done. All right, is it okay? I know that I can see there's some messages there, Moani, if there's anything that's, okay, no, we're all good. Is it okay if I move on? All right, what I want to do is just go back to sharing my screen again if I can. So just bear with me 1 second while I get my slides back up. Right. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Clear.
beautiful.
Yes, we can see.
Thank you. All right. Let me I like to be able to see you all as well. What am I trying to do here? All right, great. Okay, so now let's just quickly go through this last part, where I want to just talk a little bit about identifying a research question. Now, why I use the term identify rather than ask is that, as I said earlier, we don't necessarily find our research question and then go and do all the other work that we do when we're conducting research. In fact, what we often do is we start with a preliminary question and then we refine that question. And we refine it through engagement with the literature, through engagement with the field site. Maybe we even might do some pilot research. And then we keep coming back to think about how can we streamline our question so it's a productive research question, right? And when I say productive, it means that there are all the elements there in the question. That means we're not going to go off track. We're not trying to do something that's too big. We're not trying to do something that is actually not really a question, because a research question requires us to go out and discover something. So if we're sort of already anticipating the findings in the way that we research our question, the way that we write our research question, we need to refine it. So let me say a little bit more about that. Not all questions are researchable. So we need to think about how we develop a question that is open-ended enough that allows us to conduct research on that question and to find an answer to our question that is scientifically robust. So that might mean the generation of empirical material and analysis of that material. It might involve theoretical reasoning and theoretical work. Often the research we do combines both, right? We might be thinking about empirical sites, but we use theories and we use concepts to shape our analysis of the empirical findings. That's the way I do most of my research. And I'm really interested in developing theory that is grounded from the everyday experience and speaks back to the big theoretical debates. What is a research question? A research question is, now if you don't know this word, don't worry, an interrogative statement. So it's formed in a way that it's not just a statement of opinion, it's not just a truth, it is a question that starts with a word like why or how or who. It's a question it's a statement that is questioning. And it should be the central focus point of all your work. So all your research activities need to be focused on answering your research question. Now, this sounds like, well, of course, who wouldn't conduct research that way? But as I said earlier, often we get really sidetracked when we conduct research and we're doing a literature review, or maybe we're doing archival research. This is a classic danger with archival research, right? If you want to see how a particular issue, your question is, how has a particular issue been reported on in the local media? And so you go and you conduct some archival research of past newspaper articles, right? Or past media reports. And as you're doing that work, you find all these other interesting media reports about things that may be related, and you convince yourself they are related to your research topic, and you spend 3 days reading all these interesting newspaper reports, and then you say to yourself, how is this related to my research topic? And you've got no idea. So sometimes we have to be really disciplined and say, does this particular piece of information relate to my research question? So that's why the research question is so important, right? Because it gives you a kind of a fence in some ways around your research to determine what is relevant and what isn't relevant. So all your research activities need to be focused on your research question. That means developing your literature review, your methodology, absolutely critical. When we're designing a methodology, how is your research methodology going to answer your research question? Your data generation, your data analysis, and your write-up. So I'm going to run through this very briefly. Do not worry too much about this. It's just to help you think about different sorts of research questions. We can have normative research questions. How can we make a situation better for a particular group of people? In some ways, maybe the research article we were just discussing, in a sense, one of the questions that's driving that research is, how can we make the democratic landscape or the democratic environment or the political environment in Thailand more equitable? So it's not only the dynastic families that are getting into politics, right? Not that he necessarily answers that question, but he thinks about that question. Maybe the question is, how do we make the political environment generate more equitable outcomes for everyday Thai people? Maybe that is the normative question that the researcher is trying to grapple with. So what is the best solution to that problem, or what makes that problem continue? So that's a normative sort of research agenda. We can think about hypothetical research questions. They might be what if types of questions, right? How can police training on gender relations help to advance women's security from violence in a familial setting? So we're saying, if we do this, what will the outcome be? So your hypothetical is the if. If we do this certain thing, what kind of outcomes will we generate? So to research that kind of project, we'd need to examine police training, look at what police training is happening already, but also look at the value of other types of responses to gender violence. That might be, things like psychosocial responses, health responses, etc., etc. We might research a very factual or procedural let me start again. Our research questions might be factual or procedural. So to answer these questions, we're going to be studying and documenting observable phenomenon and processes in our world. So we're looking at what's going on out there and how do we understand it? How do we understand the way a political process works? What elements of that political process? How do we understand the outcome it generates? If we go back to the gender violence example, what is current law or current training on gender violence in a given context or a given jurisdiction? So it's perhaps slightly more descriptive sort of research explaining a particular set of processes, and maybe it might also have an element of why are those processes, why do those processes look that way, or what are the sort of outcomes that are generated by those processes as well. So it's a kind of a reporting style of research. And linked to that, we might have empirically driven questions, which seek to document and explain particular phenomenon. And again, the puzzle focus, as I've put on the slide, might be important here. So we might sort of say, okay, we have one set of conditions, we would expect a particular kind of outcome, but we see another outcome. So the empirical study would seek to understand what is it that's going on in this environment, what is it that we don't understand that is generating or that we haven't observed properly that is generating this unanticipated outcome. So in this case, our question, if we're looking at gender violence, might be, why do women complain about police dismissal of their gender violence complaints in contexts where there has been increased police training to improve responsiveness to this gendered insecurity? So the training's there, but still when women go into the police officers or the police unit to report an experience of violence, they're sent away. So we could think about that as an empirical question. Now, you don't need to know all of this. It's just to, or remember all of this. It's just to alert you to the fact that there are different kinds of research questions. Is everyone following along okay?
Yes, all good.
All good? All right, terrific. I like those little yellow thumbs up. They give me confidence that we're all here together. All right. So some key components of research questions. They need to be focused. So remember I talked before about productive research questions. So what we don't want to do is have a really broad question like, why is there so much gender violence in a particular place? We need to zero in and try and work out what we're going to focus on to answer that bigger, broader problem. Because when we're doing research, it's important to say, really what we're doing is contributing to a conversation, right? We don't have to have all the answers to all the questions about a research problem. We carve it up and find a little bit of that problem where we can generate a productive research question and contribute to the broader conversation around that problem. So developing a question that's focused enough, not so focused that it's really small and there's no potential to discover something new, but there's enough potential which allows us to say a lot about a little. So to say a lot, we want to try and think about developing a productive research question. We want to make sure that it makes sense in relation to existing studies. We're not going to try and, investigate a hypothesis that is completely irrational, like, I can't even think of something, but, bringing together two variables that are completely unrelated and trying to defend that relationship if we're, responding to a research puzzle. We want to try and write our research question as an interrogative statement. So it begins with a what or a how or a why or a who question, or that is implied in the way the question is worded. Rather than a statement, we're not seeking to confirm a truth. So we don't sort of write statement, we might say, how is that statement going to be proven, rather than just saying, oh, my research is about this statement. My research is about the importance of money, right? That's not going to tell us anything. My research is actually how and why do certain people achieve power through access to income? Something like that is a bit more researchable, still too broad, but you get my point. It needs to be clearly articulated, and you need to be able to explain it to others. Often when we're doing PhD training, we say to our students, get in the lift at the top of the building and make with a colleague, with one of your friends, and make sure you can explain your research question by the time the lift gets to the ground floor. In my building, it's only 5 floors. So that's pretty quick, right? That's about 30 seconds. So if you can clearly articulate your research question so that it makes sense to someone else, then you're on the right track. And it needs to be feasible. And this is really important. If you don't have access to the resources you need, reframe your research question, right? You need to do that study to make sure that you can develop a research question that you can personally or with your groups actually access all the resources you need to complete that research as well. And open-ended, there may be a number of different explanations, but why is it that your explanation is going to be the most interesting and the most persuasive? That's an important point as well. So now we get to the most important part of this presentation, I would say, or this class today, and it comes right at the end, and that is the importance of developing what we call, or let me say this again, it's a framework for helping you develop productive and feasible research questions. And we call it the SMART model for developing a good research question, right? So follow that little acronym down the side there, SMART. So S stands for specific. We want our research questions to be specific. So we want them to be clear and concise and focused on a single topic or issue that is feasible for you to address. So again, remember the money example. Why is money important? That's not a SMART research question. That's not a specific research question. We want to narrow that down to maybe a specific group of people, or a specific way in which money can be important for a particular group of people. Measurable. We need it to be measurable. We need to think about, okay, what is the relevant data, the relevant body of evidence, and how can it be accessed either qualitatively or quantitatively, so that we can understand how the study has been done and whether the analysis is successful or maybe is lacking in some way. So we need to be able to generate a relevant body of data and evidence to actually develop our analysis from. It needs to be achievable. So that relates to this question of feasibility, right? If you may be driven to answer a very important research question, but researching that question may be unsafe for you. It may be unsafe for participants in your study. It may require you to access data that you cannot access. You don't have access to the right databases. You don't have access to the right literature. So the achievability of your research is really important. Once you work out what a question is, the next thing you have to do before you probably do anything else is think about, what would I need to do to answer this research question, and can I do it? So achievability, really important. Relevant. How does the question align with your broader objectives and goals? And maybe if you're doing research for someone else, or you're doing research in your professional environments, how does the research question that you're posing, how relevant is it to their broader objectives and goals in their organizations or your organization that you're working for? So the relevance of your question is very important, both in terms of, how it sits within its academic relevance, but also its practical relevance to particularly if you're conducting research that is aligned with your professional work. And it should be time bound. And by that, I mean have a time scale so that you know when you've done enough research and you need to stop, right? Your project needs to have a certain amount of time clearly established so that you can actually complete it, that you don't keep on progressing and progressing and progressing and feeling like you always need to do more and more research. Research is a never-ending process, right? But you need an endpoint. You need an endpoint. And like anyone who's tackling a PhD, I think we do have a couple of PhD students in the cohort. You know, when you start a PhD, you imagine you've got forever, but that time evaporates really quickly. So having an endpoint for research is very, very important because we need to actually deliver on our research question. We need to actually deliver an answer on our research question. So that SMART framework, I think, is a really good way or a really good set of considerations for you to think about identifying a productive and feasible research question. Now, it's 2:50, and I think I'm pretty much at the end of my slides. There's a couple more, but I don't want to go to those just yet. I just wanted to leave a little bit more time for any questions that you might have or any comments.
Hello, Michael. I got a question.
Yes, who am I looking at here? Oh, Suchet. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Suchet.
We talk about measurable here. We talk about you talk about there may be a restriction to the access, there might be unsafe, but it's in your mind, so you're not sure about this yet. So I'm wondering if like we should have a good a research question first, or should we like go to test whether we can access to those data first? I'm not sure which one should come first, or can we go back and forth with this, or what? Yeah, thank you.
You answered your own question there, Suchet. I think I'm going to use a word, I don't know whether it's a word that people are familiar with, but often I think the best way to think of developing your research questions is to use what I would call an iterative process. An iterative process, which means you're going back and forth. Remember earlier I talked about refining your research question. So I would suggest that most research projects will start with a preliminary question, and then you will start to do a bit of work. And then you'll be able to get a feel for what is achievable and what's not achievable. And then you'll revisit your question. Now, for someone who's I keep using the example of a PhD, but often what we find is even after a year's work on that, that's a big project, right? Even after a year's work, when our PhD students here at UQ present on their research proposal, where they're trying to demonstrate all the elements of their project design, often the critical point that is made is actually you need to go back and refine this research question because it's either trying to do too many things, it's too broad, it's not achievable, we're not sure about you can do this work safely, we're not sure if you can access all the material. So it's often what we call an iterative process. So it's fine to have a preliminary question, but it's also good to be open to the fact that that may not be the question that you how can I put it? That the question does not remain the same all the way through the research process. And I will be very frank with you. The question I started researching with my PhD, by the time I'd written the PhD, I had answered almost a completely different question, I realized. And I actually had to rewrite the question, in the final months of my PhD, because I realized actually what had happened is that I'd, along the way, identified a much more interesting question, actually, which was the one that I ultimately answered. So that's okay. It's hard to get a smart research question in the first go. Any other thoughts, questions, or responses? Okay, I'm going to take silence as an indication both that you're still following along, maybe. Oh, yes.
Yeah, hello, Nico. Just maybe last question. How many research questions should we have? Like, let's say for like a research proposal that you submit for a PhD proposition, expression of interest for PhD, like for example. Thank you.
I think if you can articulate one clear research question, Pav, you may have a number of what we could say sub-questions. Go back to that article we just looked at, right? In fact, I would say there's one research question and maybe 2 or 3 sub-questions that are coming underneath that one question. But I think particularly for a PhD proposal, one clear question is a good strategy, because what you're trying to do is communicate your intentions clearly to someone who doesn't know you. And I think if there's a number of questions and it's not clear how they're related to each other, then that can create a lot of confusion in the mind of the reader. So having one clear question, and maybe if there's a couple of sub-questions sitting underneath that are related, and you can show they're directly related to answering your overall umbrella question, that would be quite a good strategy in my experience. And remember, I'm talking about social science, political science research. So that's what I would be looking for. And I've been a PhD coordinator who assesses a lot of applications. That's generally what I'm looking for. But that, I do want to be clear, that might be disciplinary specific too. All right. We've got 4 minutes left. So thank you for the questions. And thank you for your engagement today. What I just wanted to say is, if you want to have a go at writing a research question, a smart research question, there is a final exercise on the Padlet. There's a little news article there about the impacts of the coup in Myanmar, the gendered impacts of the military coup in Myanmar. Have a read of that and see if you can have a go at developing a smart research question in response to one of the issues that are raised in that report. There's quite a number of issues, but maybe you could have a go at developing one research question and write it into the Padlet. And I'm not sure that Kira will get time to respond to those, but I will go in and have a look at the Padlet and respond to your efforts to write questions. So you don't have to do that straight away, but that's a little bit of homework for the next week for you to have just see if you can apply some of the learning from today. So with that, maybe I should just quickly run through the conclusions. Or maybe I won't. I never really like going through the conclusions, but they're there on the slides. So you can go and have a look at those conclusions just to also remind yourself of the work we've done together today. Maybe the most important thing is thinking about identifying your research question. What is the problem? What is the puzzle? What is the research question? And how do I make it feasible? And thinking about that SMART framework as a way of doing that. And don't be afraid to refine your research question, remembering it's an iterative process. Okay, Kim-san, do you want to say anything before we sign off?
Yeah, just one thing, maybe 2. First of all, thank you, Nico. This is a great run of sessions. And I find that it's very helpful and very substantive, and I'm sure that it's very relevant and a good start for everyone to start thinking about their research and applying those research problems and smart into their research interest or research topic, or if someone are looking for a research topic, this is a great start for them. One last thing, I think we need to record our online sessions in terms of photo. So I would like to request everyone to open your camera for a few seconds so that we can have a group online photo together. And I will send this photo to AAC, Australian Award Cambodia, for media. This is what I request, and it is also good for our record as well. So for those who absolutely cannot open your camera, it is also fine. And yeah, and if I have one problem here is that I can from my screen I cannot see everyone in one screen. So if anyone can screenshot, everyone in one screen, help me with that. That would be highly appreciated.
Maybe Nico need
Maybe
to
Nicole need
close
to
the screen sharing.
stop sharing.
Yeah, okay. Nico, can you stop?
There you go. Oh, I have to kind of.
Can anyone view everyone in one screen? I still cannot do.
I don't think it fit in one screen. We are 37 people here. I will take the screen 2 as a screenshot, and yeah, you
Okay.
take screen 1 and we share.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, everyone, I will take the screen 1. Okay. I see myself in every screen that I try to take.
Bong Thung San, I finished the screenshot
Yeah.
as well. So yeah.
Okay, I'm done also. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend, and any update will be follow up and keep you informed on next week. Probably Monday or Tuesday when I get clarification from our trainer what our detailed plan for the next section, which is online session 3.
Yes, thank you, Bob.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
good weekend.
See you next week.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.